Did you know that you live in the land that's filled with exceptional people? At least that's what I've been told by right-wing Republicans. Of course, that's not really true. The American people aren't really exceptional. They're entitled, they're privileged. And no one group is more entitled and privileged than right-wing evangelical Christians. For me, entitlement is the kissing cousin of greed. One believes they deserve special treatment, while the other has an insatiable desire to acquire the things they believe they are entitled to. Crazy, right? Now, don't take this personally, but America's never really been exceptional. They're no more exceptional than any other person living on the planet, rich or poor. Now, Ronald Reagan brought this idea to the forefront of American culture by describing the United States as the shining city on a hill. Right-wing news commentator Sean Hannity frequently used the phrase American exceptionalism in his attacks on the evil forces trying to steal this country. I, of course, disagree with both of them. Sorry, America is not a shining city on the hill, nor is it exceptional. Now, this concept has been amplified by the modern right wing of the Republican Party, mostly by MAGA and white-wing evangelicals who comprise a large portion of it. It is this political ideology that now fuels the absolute greed that many Americans put on display every day. The idea of none for you and more for me. You see, they deserve God's blessing and, well, you don't. They work hard every day and Democrats, poor people, and immigrants don't. We saw this political ideology in action in the 2024 presidential election. Their greed, right-wing evangelicals especially, helped put Donald Trump into office. See, they needed a strong man. Forget the teachings of Jesus, who often talked about charity, humility, and a kingdom that isn't on this earth. So my question today is, how did millions of white American evangelicals and other right-wing sorts end up championing a political movement that seems to worship personal wealth and military power? How did the party of fiscal responsibility start pushing tax cuts for billionaires while questioning whether we can afford to provide food assistance for hungry kids? Hi, I'm David Tomsic, and this is Clear Signal. This is the story about a massive paradox. It's the story of how a powerful voting bloc came to believe that God's plan and American political power are the exact same thing. It's a story about how, here in America, greed learned to wrap itself in the language of faith and patriotism. To get it, you have to understand this isn't just about money. It's a moral system that celebrates hierarchy, makes excuses for inequality, and treats power like it's a virtue. Let's start with a contradiction that basically defines modern American politics. We're constantly told our government has to tighten its belt. We hear about the crushing national debt, usually right before someone proposes cutting social programs that help the poor, the elderly, or the sick. Republicans, especially, have built their brand on this idea of fiscal responsibility, fighting against what they call wasteful handouts and dependency. You've heard that. Of course, they are more than happy to give handouts to the rich. Yet, this same demand for austerity seems to vanish when it comes to certain other things. While programs for welfare, education, and science get their budgets squeezed, the military budget just keeps expanding. For fiscal year 2025, total defense-related spending was set to be well over $900 billion, with some estimates putting the total national security costs over $1 trillion. In recent years, the United States has spent more on its military than the next 6 countries combined. Most of them are our allies. Let's all remember that these same people are okay with massive tax cuts for the richest people on the planet. The average person who qualifies for SNAP benefits gets $188 a month. A typical household with children receives an average of $322 a month. Wow, that's a lot. But congressional and economic analysis indicates that the wealthiest 1% of Americans, including billionaires, receive an annual tax break exceeding $60,000 to $80,000 per year. Makes me sick. The hypocrisy is pretty breathtaking. Feeding hungry kids gets framed as unaffordable socialism. but giving tax breaks to the rich and funding a military bigger than any empire in history is sold as non-negotiable patriotism. After a video I did a few years ago on this subject, I was messaged on Facebook by an evangelical preacher I know. He told me that it's not up to the government to provide assistance to the poor. It's up to the church. I respectfully disagreed. He, of course, was wrong, and so was his congregation, who couldn't wait to send back immigrant children to war-torn countries. They cheered it on. You see, he believed that the church should care for the poor just as Jesus said. Okay, the problem is they don't. Now, I will tell you that this pastor's church is loosely involved with a ministry that works with people in 5 southwestern Pennsylvania counties. Okay, they provide coats in the fall, picnics, back-to-school events, community Easter egg hunts, vacation Bible school, and an annual Christmas giveaway for disadvantaged people. Now, this is all great, and I applaud it. Now, as much as these events might make the lives of those people feel better for that day, it's not enough. You see, it's a matter of scale. It's a Band-Aid. It doesn't provide the long-term assistance these people need on an ongoing basis. Food, clothing, and health care, not just 6 times a year, but every day. Now, this organization reportedly serves about 4,000 people in those 5 counties. But on a greater scale, and according to statistics, approximately 38% of the residents in those southwestern Pennsylvania counties live well below the poverty line. That's about, 350,000 people. Like I said, it's a matter of scale. Low-income families need to buy groceries. They need affordable health care for their children. But American evangelicals stand against this. Those people are lazy. And the Apostle Paul said, if you don't work, you don't eat. Only evangelical Christians can make a whole theology on one line of Scripture. They're really good at it. If they were such good Christians, why don't they follow the commandments of Jesus? He declared to feed the hungry, care for the sick and the poor. He didn't say the government can't pay a part of that. Use the tools you have in the community. Use the federal government. By the way, the United States is the richest country in history. Why can't we afford to take care of the less fortunate? Why? Because they're greedy. They don't want to use their money. They worked hard for it. Don't spend my hard-earned money on lazy people and immigrants. By the way, Jesus was an immigrant twice. Think about that one. Only the United States government has the power, the money, and the reach to build a safety net for these disadvantaged people. Evangelical churches have been willingly sold on the idea that government is bad, evil, even demonic. These same Christians are still waiting for the dividend check Donald Trump promised them. I heard it was supposed to be around $2,000 per person. Wow. There's a catch here. Trump said that to do it, he had to cut the waste in D.C. Right-wing Christians love to cut waste. They've been told for decades how everybody's stealing from them. So they cheered when he fired federal workers. They cheered when he eliminated USAID, an international program that provided life-saving medicine and food to starving people in the poorest nations on earth. Then he cut SNAP benefits and Medicaid and used that money to give tax credits to the richest people in the country. And the evangelical Christians cheered even more. Now that's blood money, my friends, blood money. Do you want to talk about greedy? Food stamps makes up 1.5% of the federal budget, 1.5%. The average person pays around $14,000 a year in taxes. That means that each taxpayer is paying $210 into the SNAP program. Do you think that's a lot for such a blessed and favored nation? Is $210 really a lot of money to help your neighbors? They tell you that God blessed America, but that blessing is just for those who follow the right-wing political theology. They'll gladly pay for the 2026 defense budget, which is about $1 trillion. Oh yeah, and we're at war. We need more money, while people here are starving. You see, right-wing conservatives love to blow up the bad guys, kill them all. How about this, right-wing conservatives? I don't want my tax dollars funding illegal wars and giving tax breaks to billionaires. How about that? For those of you who believe that the church should take care of the poor and the government shouldn't, think again. The congregations of nearly every church in America is shrinking at an alarming rate. In fact, churches are closing at record numbers. Researchers estimate that between 4,000 and 7,000 churches close each year. This proves my point. These churches can't pay their own bills, let alone address the needs of people struggling to put food on the table. To the evangelical Christian who wants to tell you, if you don't work, you don't eat, you're just ridiculous. Just another reason to say greedy. This isn't just another example of bad theology. It's a core feature of right-wing American exceptionalism. It reveals a deeply held belief. Public money spent on the poor is a moral hazard, but public money spent on projecting power is a moral good. So they're happy with so-called bad guys getting killed in their homes by American missiles. A side note here, U.S. foreign policy used to be done by diplomats. Not anymore. It's done by drones and missiles. That's what we do. It's illegal, but American Christians don't care. But American greed isn't just about wanting more for yourself. It's about a political worldview that decides who is and who isn't deserving of our help. For a huge part of the American right, the poor are simply seen as undeserving. This idea, where poverty is a personal failing and wealth is a sign of virtue, didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was built over decades in an alliance between political operatives and religious leaders. For decades, one of the most stubborn myths in American politics was the religious right organized because of the 1973 Supreme Court decision of Roe v. Wade. The story goes that evangelicals, morally shocked by the legislation of abortion, rose up and jumped into politics. But as historian Randall Balmer has pointed out, the historical record tells a different and much more cynical story. According to Balmer's research, the real catalyst that politically mobilized white evangelicals wasn't abortion. You won't be surprised at this, it was race. In 1971, a court case affirmed the IRS's right to deny tax-exempt status to racially discriminatory private schools. This was a direct threat to institutions like Bob Jones University, which had policies like banning interracial dating, policies they claimed were based on the Bible. For many Southern evangelical leaders who had set up segregation academies to get around integrated public schools, this felt like a declaration of war from the federal government. Political strategists like Paul Weyrich saw a golden opportunity here. They knew that defending racial segregation out loud was a losing game. But if they framed the issue as religious freedom versus overreaching government, they could bring together a powerful new coalition. They deliberately started looking for other issues, like the Equal Rights Amendment, gay rights, and eventually abortion, to build a moral majority. They could use the built-in organizing power of evangelical churches. The movement wasn't a spontaneous moral outcry over abortion. It was a carefully built political project that started as a defense of racial hierarchy, using the language of faith to protect itself from criticism. Now, to understand how this alliance works today, you need to know two key ideas that give it spiritual and intellectual fuel: Christian nationalism and the prosperity gospel. Christian nationalism is the belief that America is and always has been a Christian nation, and its laws and cultures should reflect a specific conservative version of Christian values. Now, this isn't just about being a Christian who happens to be a patriot. It's a political ideology that fuses Christian and American identities together, suggesting that to be a true American is to be a Christian, and that the nation's success is part of a divine plan. A 2023 PRRI survey found that a majority of Republicans qualify as either supporters or sympathizers of Christian nationalism. The worldview sees America as a nation under attack from secularism, immigrants, and progressive values, and it justifies a political war to take America back for God. I noticed in the political advertisements I got in the mail during this primary season, hundreds of them it seems, all the Republicans used the specific phrase, liberal agenda. They wear that phrase like a badge of honor. They're telling you that if you vote for someone other than a right-wing conservative who supports Trump, you support a demonic liberal agenda that consists of feeding children and providing health care to the poor. Then you have the prosperity gospel. Now, this is the belief, popular in many megachurches, that God wants believers to be wealthy, healthy, and successful. Faith becomes a kind of tool for personal gain. If you have enough faith, if you donate enough money, God will reward you with material blessings. Now, critics argue that this theology has a devastating social consequence. If wealth is a sign of God's favor, then poverty can be seen as a sign of God's disfavor or lack of faith. This logic can create a worldview that struggles with compassion for the poor. because it suggests their problems are their own spiritual failings. This lines up perfectly with free market ideology, creating a theology of market virtue, where the rich are seen as righteous and the poor are seen as undeserving. Together, these two doctrines create a powerful political engine. Christian nationalism provides the righteous cause, a holy war for the soul of America. The prosperity gospel provides theological justification for a system of radical individualism and wealth hoarding, blessing greed and demonizing need. By 2016, the relationship that started in the 1970s had become fully transactional, because it was also something more. It wasn't just a simple deal. It was a deep ideological alignment. The unwavering support for Donald Trump, a twice-divorced casino owner who didn't exactly scream family values, baffled a lot of people. But for many white evangelicals, he was the perfect fighter. He didn't need to be pious. He just needed to be a champion who could give them power. The deal was explicit: judicial appointees, Supreme Court justices who would overturn Roe v. Wade, and federal judges who would protect religious freedom, that same coded language used since the fights over segregation. In return, he got their nearly unbreakable political support. White evangelicals have remained his most solid block of support, with polling after the 2024 election showing that over 80% voted for him, his highest share on record. But the bond goes deeper than a simple transaction. It's a shared sense of grievance. Trump's Make America Great Again slogan was the perfect political echo of the Christian nationalist story of a lost golden age. He spoke directly to their feeling that the America they knew was being stolen by secular entities, immigrants, and cultural change. His rallies became a kind of political church where cultural and racial resentments were validated and blessed. This is the engine of what some call plutocratic popularism, using the language of cultural grievance to get working class people to vote for policies that mainly benefit the rich: tax cuts, deregulation, and tearing down the social safety net. They get the culture war, and the donor classes get the economic policy. So what's the real world cost of this unholy alliance? When a political theology teaches that poverty is a moral failing, the results are predictably cruel. We see it in the constant debates over cutting programs like SNAP, which helps feed tens of millions of Americans, a huge number of them children. We see it in the rhetoric that paints people needing help not as neighbors going through hard times, but as lazy takers who are just gaming the system. This isn't an accident. It's a necessary tool for the ideology. To justify a system that produces massive inequality, you first have to dehumanize the people at the bottom. You have to invent a moral story where their suffering is their own fault. The reality is that poverty in America is driven by low wages, sky-high health care and housing costs, and a lack of support for working families, not a lack of personal discipline. Meanwhile, while social programs for the vulnerable are starved, corporate welfare is just considered normal. Tax loopholes, huge subsidies for profitable industries, and bailouts for too-big-to-fail corporations are just seen as the cost of doing business. The right often opposes compassion for the poor while fiercely defending privileges for the powerful. This is the moral logic of modern greed. It's a system where we privatize the profits and socialize the losses, all while telling the most vulnerable people in our society they just need to have a little more faith. This moral framework doesn't stop at our borders. The same worldview that justifies hierarchy and punishment at home is used to justify dominance abroad. The Christian nationalist belief in America's divine purpose makes it easy to see a nation not as a country among many, but as the world's rightful leader, whose job it is to enforce global order. American power is really called empire. Instead, we hear phrases like defending freedom, promoting democracy, or protecting national security. This moral language makes the violence and coercion needed to maintain global dominance seem invisible to many Americans. It allows people to support enormous military budgets and foreign interventions without seeing them as acts of aggression, just like the war in Iran. When you believe your nation is God's chosen instrument on earth, any action taken to keep it on top can be justified. Any competitor isn't just a rival, they're an enemy of God's plan. This mindset excuses violence when it's done in the name of American strength. It's the ultimate expression of a theology that blesses power. Greed isn't just for wealth. It's for power, for dominance, for the belief that your nation is entitled to rule, and that this entitlement is a divine right. The alliance of God, greed, and MAGA isn't a glitch in the modern conservative movement. It's the central engine. It's a political theology that welds faith to free market fundamentalism and militant nationalism. It offers a moral excuse for inequality, a spiritual cover for racial and cultural resentment, and a divine mandate for American power. It's a worldview that lets its followers feel righteous while backing policies that hurt the poor and vulnerable. It has turned sanctuaries into political action committees and traded the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount for the gospel of wealth and power. The real tragedy is that greed in America really introduces itself as greed. It doesn't wear a sign. It shows up dressed as faith, patriotism, discipline, and strength. And it asks you to worship a God who blesses the rich, scorns the poor, and drapes the flag over the cross. If you found this analysis insightful, please consider subscribing right now and hitting that like button so we can do more deep dives into the forces shaping our world. I'll see you next time. Take care.